Okay, good morning. We are back to the Gemara at long last. On the bottom of Kuzayin with Aleph 107a. So the Gemara gets back to analyzing the text of the Mishnah. The Mishnah was Samuch lemincha, near the mincha time, one should refrain from eating on Erev Pesach. Now the Mishnah didn't say why, nor did it say when mincha is. That's what the Gemara is about to discuss. We ran with the assumption, which is the Gemara's conclusion now, that it means to stop eating 9.5 hours into the day. So starting from sunrise, count 9.5 halachic hours, which is halfway through the afternoon, right? Divide 12 hours into 6 morning, 6 night. And then you go 3.5 hours into the afternoon, you're at 9.5 hours from the morning. So we understood that that's what it means. And we also understood that the reason is so that you have a full appetite when you come to eating matzah at the night at Seder. And from there, we launched into, well, how does that compare to a regular Shabbos and a regular Yom Tov, where you have Kiddush, and you also want to have an appetite for Kiddush. Or, hey, maybe you might extend your meal and forget about Kiddush. And that got us into a whole discussion about making Kiddush mid-meal, because according to many, and the halachic opinion, you're allowed to eat on Friday afternoon. But if you continue your meal into Kiddush time, you got to stop and make Kiddush. And that was the whole discussion, which got us into a whole discussion in general about the laws of Kiddush. Right? But that all ran on the assumption that the Gemara is about to conclude now, which is, again, that mincha, when the Mishnah says that by mincha times, near the mincha time, stop eating, A, that means 9.5 hours in the day. And B, that's because we're worried you're going to, or because you want you to have an appetite when you come to eating matzah later that night. Yeah? That assumption is built on the conclusion we're about to read from the Gemara now, because the Gemara is going to present two options for what it might mean and conclude, as we just said, that it means 9.5 hours in the day and that we're worried you're going to, we want you to have an appetite for matzah. Yeah? Okay. So let's look at the Gemara. So we're kind of like backtracking in some ways, because we're backtracking to the first principle, like, what we assumed until now, we're going back to that assumption and seeing how we got there. Okay. Right, meaning, again, we just mentioned this a bunch of times, that the Gemara isn't written by one person writing from beginning to end. So the last 7 pages of discussion assumes you know the conclusion of the Gemara now, even though the Gemara now hasn't been read to us yet. But the people speaking would have likely known the conclusion already, right? But now we're actually going through the discussion that got them to that conclusion. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So 2 lines from the bottom of the page of Kuzayin with Aleph 107a, second word. Right. There's a colon, and then there's 2 words, and then a colon again. Mm-hmm. Right. So in between the 2 colons, as is the Gemara's way, it quotes the relevant section of the Mishnah, and then it comments. So the Mishnah said these 2 words, Samuch lemincha, near mincha time, refrain from eating on Erev Pesach. So the Gemara asks, he inquired of them. So, right, we remember this, that whenever the Gemara uses the word bayi, that's the root word here, it's an inquiry, which means the questioner has no agenda, he just wants to know. And in this instance, the prefix and suffix indicate it's a single person asking of many people. Ibaya is a singular, he asked, lahu, of them, in the plural, which means that someone walked into the Beit Medrash, or one of the students in the Beit Medrash posed the following question before everybody in the Beit Medrash, and they all discussed. And now it's being transcribed. So here's this question. When it says to stop eating before mincha meaning afternoon, is that mincha gedola, the big afternoon? The big afternoon means that from this time to nighttime, there's a long way to go. So we're talking about right after the afternoon starts, 6.5 hours from when the day begins. Again, the halachic hours. Yeah. So you take the time between sunrise and sunset and divided by 12. So 6.5 hours. So a little bit past midday. Mm-hmm. And that's called a big mincha because you have a large amount of time for the rest of your afternoon. So is that the point at which the Mishnah is telling you to stop from 6.5 hours in the day? Or perhaps samuch lemincha. It means near the small mincha, which is 9.5, halfway through your afternoon, and it's called small because you have less time to the rest of your afternoon. Okay, what would be the rationale of either of these understandings? So he explains. The questioner explains himself. Tanan, one can learn samuch lemincha gdola, that the Mishnah here means to stop eating before the large mincha at 6.5 hours in the day. We'll just call it 12:30. 12:30 halachic out time, but let's just imagine that sunrise is 6 and sunset is 6, making it easier. So it's 12:30. So samuch lemincha gdola time, maybe we're talking the logic to say that it means to stop eating from the large mincha from 12:30 umishum Pesach, because we're concerned for your Pesach offering, which would mean that this halacha specifically applies in temple times, or at least in Pesach offering times, where you're doing your Pesach offering after the daily afternoon offering. So, explain.
Usually the afternoon offering was the very last.
So on a normal day, the afternoon offering is the very last offering of the day. On Erev Pesach, the Pesach offering is actually after the afternoon offering. So on a regular day, Monday or Sunday through Thursday, they would do the afternoon offering at its regular time, and you would still have a few hours afterwards to do the Pesach offering. And then you roast your Pesach offering, which is the halacha. You have to make it roasted tzli, right? Cooked directly on the flame, not in the pot with water. You can do so once Yom Tov starts, or whenever, because you got to cook on Yom Tov. But if the first day of Pesach is Shabbos, which means you're doing your Pesach offering on Erev Shabbos, so now you have to cook your Pesach offering before Shabbos starts, which means everybody has to have time to, first of all, slaughter their Pesach offering on Erev Pesach in the afternoon after the daily afternoon offering, and get it cooked before Shabbos starts. So you got to do it earlier. So when that would happen, they would do the afternoon offering at the earliest point possible, which is 12:30, right, or 6.5 hours in the day. Do the afternoon offering, and then they would have enough time afterwards, the whole rest of the afternoon, to do the Pesach offering and to cook it. So the earliest time which you might be doing your Pesach offering is at 12:30, 6.5 hours after the day starts. And therefore the logic might be, don't eat after the 6.5 hours. You're gonna get distracted. You'll miss your whole Pesach. You'll miss your Pesach offering. Right? And that's explained here. So Tanan, the logic to say that the Mishnah means here to stop eating by 12:30, by the big mincha, mishum Pesach, because of the Pesach offering. What I just explained is based on Rashbam's commentary. Dilma, perhaps, or less, he might get distracted by his meal, top of Kuzanim base, top of 107b, and he might fail to do his Pesach offering because he's busy with his meal. So he's having an afternoon lunch, and time's going, it's Erev Shabbos, or whatever, it's Erev Pesach, and he's going to miss his Pesach offering. And therefore, the moment there's a possibility you might do your Pesach, the moment the obligation for your Pesach offering sets in, the earliest time would be 12:30, which, right, because usually it's later, but on Erev Shabbos, they would do it at 12:30, and therefore, because that's the earliest time for when your Pesach obligation kicks in, we tell you, your Pesach offering obligation kicks in, we tell you, don't eat now because you might miss your Pesach offering. That would be the logic to say that's what the Mishnah means there.
Across the board.
Yeah, we make a rule across the board, stop eating every year. As a rule, the sages, when they enact these kinds of things, They don't tell you, well, if the circumstance is X, then yeah, X. If the answer is Y, then Y. If it comes to complicated, no one knows what the halacha is, and you end up undermining yourself when you're trying to prevent mistakes like that.
Right.
So you want to make a uniform. When 12:30 hits, nobody eats because it's Pesach time. Even if technically you're not doing Pesach for another 2 hours, but Pesach time, exactly. Pesach time kicks in, no eating. Not to say, well, when Pesach is done later, don't stop eating later. When Pesach is done earlier, stop eating earlier. We make a rule. Pesach time comes in, which is 12:30, no eating. Yeah, we're worried you're going to miss your Pesach. It's time to focus on your Pesach offering. Don't be busy with a meal. Okay, that's one way to think about the Mishnah. Or perhaps this is the questioner still explaining himself when he inquired as to what the Mishnah means. Or perhaps, second line of Kuzayin Beis, Samuch lemincha ktana tanan. We mean here close to the small mincha. That is to say, 9.5 hours in the day. In our scenario, we're at 6 to 6, 3:30. Now, what would be the logic here? As we explained, which is our assumption already, because we know the conclusion. But here's where it comes from. Mishum matzah, because of your mitzvah that's of matzah, which is coming up later tonight. Lest you eat your matzah with a gasa means like a gasa literally means like thick. You're eating it in a disrespectful manner. You know, you're already full and you're forcing yourself to eat matzah. It's not appropriate for a mitzvah matzah. A mitzvah, Hashem asks you to eat something, to eat it when, I'm stuffed. Nah, stick matzah into my throat because I have to. Eat matzah because you're excited to. And if I don't have a meal starting late in the afternoon, if I eat at 1 o'clock or 1:30, 2 o'clock even, I'm still going to be hungry when I get to the matzah at 8:30, 9 o'clock tonight. But if I had a meal at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and my obligation for matzah sets in at 7:30, I just finished eating. Right? Especially if we're going to follow the view which says that once you start eating at a time when it's permitted, you don't have to stop. You just can't start. Which means if I started my meal at 3 o'clock, I'm allowed to continue going, even after 3:30. So if I were told you're allowed to eat your meal at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to keep on going into my Pesach meal, treating it like Shabbos, where mid-meal I'll make a kiddush, and then matzah comes at the end of this whole elaborate meal. That's not good. We want you to have an appetite. So we tell you don't eat from 3:30.
But wouldn't the first case be even stronger on that opinion? Because you're stopping eating earlier. Okay,
so that's correct. So the second issue, which is to make sure you have an appetite for Pesach, would be covered. Have an appetite for matzah would be covered if you stop eating at 1:30, 12:30 in the afternoon. Even more so, absolutely. All right, but that wouldn't explain why you stopped so early.
Right.
You only stopped so early because of your Pesach offering.
What's the more advantaged position, having to do stopping at mincha?
So in other words, you're suggesting that the first option is covers both, and the second option only covers one.
Yeah,
I can take that. So maybe that's what he's asking.
Yeah.
I'm anyways covering both. I can start earlier. I'll cover both issues.
Yeah.
Perhaps. I didn't see it in Rashi or Rashbam, but I'll take it. Why not? Okay.
Maybe it's too long of a wait.
So be hungry. But be hungry. Have a big breakfast and be hungry.
Yeah.
And eat your Pesach offering and your matzah full. See, what's interesting is that the Gemara doesn't say, in other words, if you're anyways suggesting that we're talking about a time period when we're doing the Pesach offering, the Gemara could have said, stop eating at 3:30 so that you eat your Pesach offering with appetite. That's not what the Gemara says here. It says you might eat your matzah without an appetite. It's almost as if option A is this is a issue of temple times. Option B is this is a universal time, transcendent for all times, because you always have the mitzvah of matzah.
Right.
So it almost seems like that too.
And also,
is the Mishnah speaking to your pre-temple destruction or post-temple destruction? Even though the Mishnah is compiled post-temple destruction, it sometimes compiles many times compiles laws that are relevant only to temple times. So that could be also a deeper layer of the discussion here. Is this Mishnah pre-temple or post-temple?
Also, the Pesach offering is not to be eaten on the post.
Exactly.
You're supposed to eat the Hagiga offering prior to the Pesach offering. So that you actually are full.
You're actually supposed to be full when you get to the Pesach offering, which could be another reason why the Mishnah says here, we're worried about you eating matzah. Because in theory, you'd be eating matzah first, then your chagiga, and then after your whole meal, then eating your Pesach offering. So to say we're worried about you eating your Pesach offering when you're full is not an issue because you're supposed to be full. But nonetheless, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe the question is not about a pre or post temple, because even in temple times, the issue is not eating Pesach with an appetite, but eating matzah with an appetite. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
No, very good. Very good. Very, very good. Yeah. Well, actually, in temple times, you'd be eating your matzah together with your Pesach offering. You're supposed to eat together, right? Matzah and maror and Pesach together. Certainly Hillel would have done that, right? He would have put out matzah and maror, the sandwich with the matzah and maror and Pesach offering all together. Sorry?
That was with the Pesach?
Yeah. He had like a shawarma and a lafa. He probably had soft matzah, not hard matzah. Put a little lettuce in there, a little bit of spice.
You your hagiga before that?
Yeah.
So then maybe
in this
maybe you weren't even hungry for matzah either.
Exactly. Exactly.
Really
now from that thinking, and the issue of having an appetite for matzah is only in the post-temple era. I'm counteracting what you're saying.
Right. That's right.
If you're eating matzah together with your Pesach, and therefore you're full when you eat your matzah also, then this issue of eating matzah with an appetite is only in our days. But I imagine, though, that they probably had a similar seder to us, in which they ate matzah first, maror, had a meal. Well, actually, no, they would have had a sandwich with their Pesach offering. No.
Would they have had the hagiga before the seder?
No, at the seder.
At the seder.
Yeah, at the seder.
At what point?
During the meal. When we have Shulchan Aruch, the meal,
so
which is we have our egg, right?
We eat the matzah first, then
right. But the sandwich we also eat before the meal. They would have eaten the sandwich at the end of the meal because they have to eat it together with their Pesach offering, which has to be at the end of the meal. Which is at the end of the meal. We eat the sandwich before the meal.
Yeah.
Right, but in the temple times, they would have eaten the sandwich after the meal. Because the sandwich, the primary concern of the sandwich, the primary objective of the sandwich there is to have your Pesach offering with matzah and maror, as per the verse which says, "Al matzah samreim, eat your Pesach offering together with your matzah and maror." So actually, the sandwich would have been back then at the end of the meal together with the Pesach offering, which is what we do tzafon. When we have matzah at the end of our meal, that's for the Pesach offering, right? We have matzah at the beginning of the meal to fulfill the obligation of matzah, and at the end of the meal, before we bench, we have another matzah tzafon. That's to commemorate the Pesach offering. Now that's when they would have eaten their sandwich. So perhaps they would have eaten matzah also at the beginning of their meal too. In which case, having an appetite when you have for matzah would have been a couple times too. Because they would, if they would have eaten matzah like we do before their meal, which presumably they would have, I assume. Yeah. Anyway, so it's still up for what's the word? Discussion as to whether the Gemara here means is this a post-temple and pre-temple question, or is this a question of even before temple destroyed? Are we concerned about missing Pesach, or are we concerned with matzah appetite? Or is matzah appetite not an issue in temple times? It's a good question. Okay, I see some commentary from Tosfos discussing this, that there's two levels of eating when you're full. I was actually thinking about this because of Yom Kippur. Now, we learned this in Gemara Yuma. The halacha in Yom Kippur is like this: if a person is so stuffed that when they eat, they're actually repulsed, but they just stuff their face anyway. One's not, although it's prohibited, one's not in violation to the point that they're liable for that eating, for karas, because the eating doesn't constitute eating because of how terribly horrible it is.
Right, it's like harming them.
That's right. That is not the same as eating Pesach at the end of your meal when you're full.
No.
So there's a delineation here between being stuffed to the point that it's like eating matzah like that, to the Pesach offering being eaten when you're full. Right?
So maybe what they're talking about here is you stop eating so that you won't be so full to the point that you're disgusted.
Yes,
and eating, right? And therefore.
Yeah. And therefore, the Tosfos rejects the Rashbam's explanation, which we just gave, that it's talking about nowadays. Okay, so I see it's not so simple. It's a whole discussion. Okay, we touched a nerve here, clearly in the Gemara. Yeah. Now, Titus argues that the Pesach has the same issue, that you're not supposed to eat it when you're stuffed, you're supposed to eat it when you're full, not when you're stuffed. And therefore, he rejects the explanation we just gave that it's referring to nowadays, which is why the Gemara chose matzah as opposed to saying Pesach. Right? Okay, so clearly this is a big discussion. We touched a nerve. And this is when we say Baruch Shekivanti. Thank Hashem, we got it right. I think I mentioned this a number of times. When you learn the Gemara or any text, and you ask the same question the commentaries ask, now you know you learned it well. Even if you didn't come to the same conclusions, it doesn't matter. If you came to the same questions, it means you were reading it the same way they did.
Raise the issue.
And that's why, that's right, you're reading it the same way they did because you came to the same issue that they did. So, Baruch Hashem. So we can see that this is a big discussion.
Teach that in law school. It's just a matter of spotting the issues.
That's right.
The professor will give you a fact pattern, and you throw in what they call red herrings, things that look like they're issues, but they're really not. They're you
have to know what's.
So if you highlight the red herring, you got it wrong.
No.
If you cite the right issues, and
you got it right. That's very good.
Even though you may come to a different conclusion, but no.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're left with our question because we know the answer already. That it's an issue of eating matzah when you're full. We already know this from our previous Gemara, but tomorrow we're going to see where the Gemara came to that conclusion, and it comes from our friend Agrippas, who we met in Gemara Saita. In Gemara Saita, we met Agrippas, who had the hakel, and he cried because of his questionable lineage when he was doing the hakel. Remember that?
Yeah.
So the Gemara is going to tell us a little bit about Agrippas's practice, and the way in which the Mishnaic text frames Agrippas's practice will inform us about what time of day we're talking about. We're talking about when Agrippas ate on a regular day and what the law was with him regarding Pesach. And that will tell us what the Mishnah means when it says to stop eating by mincha time.
Wow, thank you.
Okay, wonderful day. It's good to get back into Gemara.
Yeah.
And Baruch Hashem, our brains haven't lost that ability to
Right.
think. Very good.
Yeah.